Hello, my name is Michele, and you're listening to Profit is a Choice. With us today is Todd Palmer, CEO of Extraordinary Advisors. He's an executive coach, an author, and a speaker committed to helping business owners tackle their obstacles and clear a path to success. Todd understands struggles, and he's going to share those on the podcast today. He's had it all, and he's lost it all, from a thriving business to over $600,000 in debt, and then finding his way back out. We're going to talk about that journey because it is a journey and a process, along with these topics: imposter syndrome, redefining success and failure, and managing our mindset, as well as being authentic and vulnerable in our relationships. We cover so many topics, but one of the most important takeaways that I want to go ahead and give you even before you listen is that we are not alone in this entrepreneurial journey, even if we feel that way. So I hope you get a lot out of this, and I hope you enjoy it. Every day, empowered entrepreneurs are taking ownership of their company financial health and enjoying the rewards of reduced stress and more creativity. With my background as a financial software developer, owner of multiple businesses in the interior design industry, educator, and speaker, I coach women in the interior design industry to increase their profits, regain ownership of their bottom line, and to have fun again in their business. Welcome to Profit is a Choice. Hey, Todd, welcome to the podcast today.
Great. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm excited to talk with you about entrepreneurship.
Exactly. And that is a topic that we all love for sure. As we get started, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your journey, your history, and what brought you to do the work that you're doing today?
Sure. Well, I started my first business when I was 27 years old, and I started a staffing business to help people get new jobs and help companies find new employees. And I had an idea of how that would go, and we were going to go and deliver people. We set up a transportation company, would pick people up and deliver them to businesses. This is before there was Uber. It did pretty well for about 7, 8, 9 years. But going on year 10, I found out that things weren't going as well as I'd hoped. The economy was shifting and changing. This was about 2006. The economy had shifted and pivoted away where companies were using a lot of people. They were scaling back. And we didn't realize it, but we ran on the brink of a recession. During that time, I had chased a couple other business opportunities, as well as kind of gotten frustrated with some of the employees I had. I grew the business to 3 locations. I had 24 employees. And I thought, scaling the business to that size was going to make me very, not only emotionally happy, but also financially successful. In the process, I ended up taking my mind off the ball. And by September of 2006, I was $600,000 in debt. I was 2 months away from running out of all of my money, as well as losing my house. And at the time, I was a single parent, so my kid was not real happy with me. And I hired a coach. I dug deep and dug into the finances that I didn't understand when I got into it, because I was basically doing sales in my previous career before becoming an entrepreneur and didn't really understand the numbers. Learn more about the numbers. And then finally, I decided to dig into the culture and the toxicity that we had allowed to occur. And on September 9th of 2006, I fired my entire company and I started over. Changed a lot of processes, changed a lot of the way I looked at the business, how I interacted with the business, and finally redefined what success looked like to me. Boom, once I did that, we went on a great run where we were one of America's most fastest growing companies, making the Inc. 5000 as one of those fastest growing businesses 6 times. So it's kind of been a wild ride as an entrepreneur for me.
Okay, whoa. First, did you have a goal to start off as an entrepreneur? I mean, to start off as an entrepreneur at 27, over almost 20 years ago, there wasn't a big push for entrepreneurship back then like there is now.
Oh, it was a completely different world. We didn't have the Shark Tanks and the CNBCs telling everybody to go after being an entrepreneur. No, for me, it tied back to becoming a single parent. I got in custody of my son. I realized that in order to have a sustainable one-parent income, I couldn't be all things to all people all the time. And I figured out that the best way for me to manage my time and manage my schedule, like what I think a lot of your listeners today might be running into, was to go into business for myself. And I picked the perfect time. The country was like it is today in 2019. Back in 97, it was full employment. If you had people, companies would hire you. And it kind of became this runaway freight train of how many people can I get placed? How many companies can I acquire? And it became a very interesting scheduling model for my family. So my son and I would get up at 5 a.m. He'd still be half asleep. I'd drop him off at daycare with the promise that he'd be the first kid out of daycare. So 4 o'clock, I'd pick him up. So he was in there for quite several hours, but he recognized that he was able to come home and he was the first kid to leave. And he made a lot of friends, and we moved a lot of mindsets around, what a work-life integration looked like, because I used to explain to him that work-life balance was impossible. And so it really grew out of that. And as he got older and as he got into school, I shifted and changed some of my work habits. But for a long time, it was get up at 5, pick him up at 4. My daddy-son time was from 4 until 8. He'd go to bed at 8. And then from 8:30 until midnight, I'd go back to work doing the bookkeeping and the catching up on things. And I had to become very scheduled, disciplined in order to have that quality time with my son and not have to be on the road across the country, hiring sitters, doing all those things that I didn't want to do, which felt for me as a parent out of alignment with my core values.
Yeah. And, many of us, mine was different push behind it, but I left my corporate job actually in 98. Where I was working for Dun & Bradstreet building financial software. And I came home because I was dropping our kids off. I had 2 at that point, and they were 1 and 3. And I was dropping them off at daycare and practically in their pajamas and picking them up in their pajamas and then, trying to be a mom at the same time. And it was just too much. Sure. And so my husband and I made the decision that I would come home and raise the kids, but I also wanted to have that outlet and I wanted to work. I love what I do. And so, I ended up starting kind of a side hustle so that I could have that and make money and do my thing. But also, I love how you said the work-life integration. I usually call it sometimes even just a centeredness, because their balance makes us think that it has to be equal, and that's not really the way that it ever works out. So I like more of the idea of integration, as you put it. And I would say many of our listeners are in similar positions, right. As their lives change, they want to make sure that they can, I always call it almost being 3-dimensional. I don't want to be a 1-dimensional woman, like I am a wife and a mom, or I am a business owner. I want to have more than that, and the integration allows for that.
Well, I think you really hit on an important thing that as a human being, you need to fill your bucket. And a lot of the entrepreneurs that I work with in my new business, we talk a lot about what they want. And I have one entrepreneur that I work with. He wanted to spend more time with his grandchildren. And in order for him to do that, he had to change the way he worked within his business to free up that time. And he felt guilty about it. And he had a lot of self-criticism and a lot of negative self-talk. And we worked it through for him to understand that he can be the best grandparent and the best spouse to his husband, and also the best owner for his business if his bucket is filled. And he can't fill his bucket if he's not honest with himself of what fills his bucket. Sometimes it's working on his business. Sometimes it's long walks with his wife. And a lot of times it was spending time with the grandchildren. And as long as he was able to do that, when he went back to work, he felt refreshed, renewed, and it actually integrated more with a sense of purpose with things by allowing himself the freedom and removing the guilt of not being all things to all people all the time.
For sure. I just did a retreat with some of my one-to-one clients, and we were doing business planning for 2020 at the time. And they thought I was going to start, I think, by asking, so, what do you want in your business for next year and all of that. And I brought up this idea of, as you phrased it, work-life integration, or, what does it feel like if I were to just say having a balanced life, what does that conjure up? Like, what does it mean to you, right? Because it, like you said, can mean something different to each of us at different points in our life. And I had them say, is it that I want to go on that walk once a week? Is it that I want to go out with my girlfriends to have dinner? Is it that I want to go on date night? Is it that I need to read a book, or whatever it is? Fill in the blanks. And all right, now let's go plan and schedule that. And now let's see how we're going to change what we do and work to be able to make that happen. Because something shifts, right? If this is going to shift left, something has to shift right. There's another shift that has to happen. And it's been really fun to see them step back and realize that they have the ability to make those changes. Like you made a huge change when you went in and let everybody go and started over, because it just was not set up in a process and in a way that was working for you and for the life that you wanted. That's huge.
It really wasn't. And it was really challenging. And that's what the coach I used at the time really helped me figure out is, what did success ultimately look like to me? And it was a process I worked on over time. And then I became an empty nester, and that shifted what success looked like. And the company was doing well, and we were making great money and winning awards. But ultimately, it was me really sitting, being quiet, recognizing who I was in the moment, what was going to help me be successful, because I'd really gotten sucked into a little bit of I guess you'd maybe call it the success trap that, my business is doing, X millions of dollars in revenue. That should make me happy. Or we're making enough money to be able to afford this, this, and this. That should make me happy. And I found, and I think this is a really important lesson for me to recognize, that I found that the awards and the revenue and the income didn't fill my definition of happiness internally. So I saw this quote from Tony Robbins about 5 or 6 years ago, and it shifted everything for me. And he put out there that success is doing what you want, when you want, with whom you want to do it with, as often as possible. And what I loved about it immediately was it didn't have a price tag attached. And it was really about those relationships. And around the same time, I read this really interesting study done of hospice workers. And the journalist interviewed hospice workers, and the question became, what did people talk to you about as a hospice workers at the end of their lives? And by and large, the report showed that people were talking about, I wanted to have I wish I had more quality relationships in my life. I wish I had more time with family. I wish I had said no to more things. I said yes to too many things. And I worked too hard, not doing something I was passionate about. And that really, really resonated hard with me, because I could see myself in their stories. So the redefining of success, plus the understanding and learning from other people what they at the last stages of life wanted, really shifted my entire being around a work-life integration.
I am a Profit First certified coach, and I'm looking at people's financial statements constantly. And one of the whole reasons that I did this particular podcast, Todd, was because sometimes people think that profit, and I mentioned this to you before we came on air, that profit's all about the money. And I'm about having a profitable company, right? But that is not the only indicator of success, exactly what you just said. And I've been there where I made the money and still kept thinking, well, I'm not happy, or I wish I had something else. And that's why I love that idea of really thinking, what is the balance that I'm looking for? How do I define success? Because if not, and we make it about a number, when you reach the number and you still don't feel, I guess, the way in air quotes, we're supposed to feel, right?
Right.
Then you feel let down, yet you accomplished something great. I know for me, I'm an empty nester as well. And I've been doing a lot of the same work, right? That you're a coach, I'm a coach. We coach people to do this work, but we have to do it too.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And so for this new year, one of the things that I wanted to do was I have wanted to take a watercolor class. I wanted to paint. And I just, for years, I keep putting it off, thinking I'll do it. I'll get around to it. When work settles down, when it gets slower, and I realized this train has left the station and it is going fast. It is the only one who's going to slow the train down is me. And I've not been pumping the brakes. And so there is not going to be a time to do this. And I just made the decision, I'm going to do it. Now's the time. And so I signed up for a 6-week course, and I'm doing it right in the middle of the workday, because that's what I want to do. And honestly, even being at a place in my business that allows me the flexibility to do that feels like success. And so it goes right into the quote that you said. I think it was, do what you want, when you want, with who you want, as often as possible. And basically, that's exactly what I mean, right? That's maybe not quite Tony's words, but that's the gist of it.
Sure.
But that's what I wanted to do. And that's the business that I try to build for myself and for others. But let me ask you this. Did you also, because one of the big issues that fear keeps us captive, right?
Oh, of course.
Right. And so having to redefine success, I'm curious, Todd, did you have to also redefine what failure was? I mean, to be 600,000 in debt and having to let go of a huge staff? I know when you said it, it came across as just something you do, but I know that had to be a very weighty, well thought out decision. It wasn't like you walked in and got angry one day. So no, I know that all of that weighed on you heavily. It was. Go ahead. Did you have to redefine failure as you redefine success?
That's a great question. I wish more people would ask it when I do these podcasts, because that's exactly what I had to do. I suffered from a syndrome called imposter syndrome. And I was struggling to make the difficult decisions. I thought I had to truly be all things to all people. At times I was a perfectionist. At times I was a soloist and an isolationist. And none of that served me well. And my identity was strongly tied to the business. If the business was doing great, I must be great. Boy, if the business isn't doing so well, and being $600,000 in debt is not doing well, then I'm not a good person. I'm not a good entrepreneur. At my core, there's something definitely wrong with me. And so what I ultimately ended up doing is I ended up connecting. I hired a second coach, and he really helped me work on my mindset around that. Because even after I let everybody go, I carried a lot of that burden with me. And I could certainly, in some instances, point to work that they weren't doing. But then I'd say, well, yeah, but I didn't hold them accountable. And I could talk to areas they didn't execute in. Yeah, well, I didn't go on that appointment with them. And I would just basically kick my own butt, and it was doing me no good. So the first coach I had really helped me get out of that, but I still carried it for many years. My second coach ended up being a neuroscientist who specializes in working with high-performance executives. And he really taught me that failure is a falsehood, that it's something put in through society. And he talked about when he works with people, he puts us under brain scans and he shows us how our brains fire. And in the process of learning that, he shared with me that if I continue to talk to myself in such a negative way and give failure that energy in that time, my brain would fire like this, and it wasn't healthy. If I was able to recognize that every step along the process of success in life and in business and in parenting, there's going to be ups and downs. And to replace the word happy with satisfied and to take failure off the table. And as long as I learned something, including learning that I shouldn't manage people the way I was managing them back in 2006, to learn that I was going after the wrong markets in 2006, to learn that I didn't have the financial literacy that I required, like Michele talks about in Profit First. If I didn't have all those things and I learned that I needed them and then I acquired them, I didn't fail. I just learned a new skill. And maybe it was painful, but I learned something new, and I continue to iterate forward. And that shift away, taking the mantra of failure off the table for me was truly game-changing, not only in my professional life, but also in my personal life.
I love the book Failing Forward by John Maxwell.
Right. Great book.
Yeah. And it's the same kind of thing. And then I also think I heard Sarah Blakely of Spanx mention one time that when they sat around the table, when people really sat around the table to have full dinners, we used to do that, but my kids are all gone now. But, they would sit around the table at night and their dad would say, "Where did you fail today?" And it was a celebratory item, right? Because what she said was that meant that you went outside your comfort zone and you tried something new. And so they celebrated their successes where they got something right. But she grew up in a household where they understood that her dad really kind of showed them that the world's idea of failure is giving you the ability to learn. And so what did you learn? So tell me where you failed today and what did you learn out of that? And that struck me, like, what if we all really thought that way? Like, to your point, took failure kind of off the table and reframed it as an opportunity to learn. And I'll tell you, from my own experience, I've learned so much more when things didn't go right than when they went right.
Well, and that's what my coach told me. He's like, the brain doesn't, and he was so scientific about it, which really appealed to a strong way I looked at the world at the time, because the brain doesn't learn anything when you get it right naturally. And he goes, then you add in the mythology perpetrated within the media. In the mythology, you watch a movie and a character is a savant, and well, we should all be savants. Or you see something like, and this is what kids suffer with now so much, is that dying need for social approval through Instagram, through Snapchat, through the social media platforms, and how many likes can I get, and that external validation. Mm-hmm. Whereas if we are able to recognize that failure is really just a construct and not an actuality, and we can choose to interact with it differently, it truly changes lives. I was so blessed. I typically do, when I speak, I typically speak to entrepreneurial audiences or business leader audiences. But a buddy of mine asked me to come and speak at his event in Toronto, Canada. And up there, it was a mixed audience. So there's kids in the room and parents and school administrators. It was so I had to move some things around. And I gave the speech, and I talked about this construct around failure. And a 9-year-old boy came up to me, and he drew a diagram of what I had said and how he processed that, and how he basically said, you said fail 12 times, and you said you learn along the way. So if I really never get to that 12th time, I'm never going to fail. And he goes, I'm not going to do something 12 times the exact same way. That's just crazy. And his parents are laughing, and I'm laughing. And he goes, so basically, I'm never going to fail again. Thank you, Mr. Todd. And he walked away, blew my mind. He's now, I think in my slide deck, he's number 27. I was so blown away by this young man and his diagram. I took a picture of him, because if a 9-year-old boy can learn it, then a 30-year-old or 40-year-old or 50-year-old or 60-year-old entrepreneur or solopreneur can learn it too.
My youngest son is dyslexic. And so I can remember when we were getting him through 3rd and 4th grade, and he is smart as a whip, but his memory and processing certain information just does not come back to him as quickly. And I remember a particular science test that he failed, and he came home and made the comment, I think he was 3rd or 4th grade. He's like, I'm such a failure. Right? So that's an internalization of that. And I said, no, you're not. I said, what makes you think that? Well, I failed the science test. And I said, yeah, but is that all of you? Or was that just a moment in time? He's like, it was a moment in time. I said, so what I really think is maybe your study skills failed you. So, and then he was like, okay. And so I said, when did you start studying? The night before. Okay, well, we know that doesn't work. I said, how about next time, let's try 2 nights before. So he did 2 nights before the test, he made a B. And I said, oh, so you're not a failure, right? Your study skills didn't fail you. Could we improve them again? So he said, well, the next time, right? So now he's got this something to hold on to. All right, so next time, why don't I try doing 2 nights before? And then he made an A. And so that he started to realize that he was not the action or the outcome, right? He's separate from the outcome. But as you said, financial literacy, hiring practices, working with your employees, communication skills, those are the things, study skills, those are the things that we have to learn and recognize. There are 3 questions that I always ask, and I think I got them from John Maxwell. It's like, what went really well? I would do it again. What didn't go so well? And I would change it, add it, or delete it. And what did I learn? And when I can pull myself up and ask those questions every time, it gives me such a different vantage point, and it takes some of the emotion out of it so that it allows me to see what happened in a way that I can either recreate it or choose not to recreate it.
Yep. And what I love about what you did is you worked with your son in a language he can understand, no different than working with an employee the best way they learn. And then you didn't. And this happens in business and happens in families. No shame, no guilt. You acknowledged it, and then you created essentially process correction, not people correction. So I give you a lot of credit for being so attuned on how to move him forward to become a successful student for the studying he needed to do.
Well, when it's your child who is internalizing something like that, you will learn a skill very quickly, because the last thing I wanted to do, right? And I wasn't even coaching back then, but the last thing I wanted to do was to make him think that he was what he did. Those are different things. That would be like, again, and I'm a woman. I struggle and have for years. I mean, I'm you can't get away from the media influences. This is what beauty looks like.
Sure.
For a man, this is what success looks like. This is what fill in the blank. And the problem is that gauge is always moving.
Oh,
So
for sure.
you might fit the mold on Monday, but you might not fit it on Tuesday. And now what are you going to do? And so I just want to make sure that my kids and myself, that our value and our worth is not tied up in that, because that would keep me hostage and make me feel like I couldn't try things or do things. And nobody wants to live that way. That's a shackled way to live. So that any success we get is empty.
Right. And it's not long lasting and it's not sustainable.
No, even when it's great.
Yeah. Because even every business has high points and low points. Things can happen beyond your control. I mean, I've got a client right now whose business was doing great. They changed a regulation within a governmental code. His business is very vulnerable right now, and he's got to pivot away from his bread and butter of 25 years. Now,
right. It can happen quickly.
No, and he didn't do anything out of the ordinary. He was producing, he was providing, but a switch in government regulations is game changing for his business, and he didn't even see it coming.
So I have another question for you. You used a phrase that I think I told you before, many of the interior designers and workrooms and all that I work with are female. And this phrase comes up with us all the time. I would be interested to hear from a men's perspective, this idea of imposter syndrome, because we have it, we get it, we know it. I know what it looks and feels like as a woman. Tell me what that looks and feels like as a man, that idea of imposter syndrome.
Oh gosh, we could do a whole broadcast on that alone. So again, I think it's best to speak from experience. So for me, my imposter syndrome came down to, the itty bitty negative committee in my head, essentially my self-talk, which tied into going back to childhood and how my parents parented me, in the 80s, how was, you'd get 5 A's on your report card and 1 C. All your parents wanted to talk to you about was your C, not the areas you succeeded in. Nowadays, thankfully, a lot of people have shifted over. Let's highlight and play to your strengths, especially now in business. We can outsource a lot of our weaknesses. So I was trying to be all things to all people, which had it for me was kind of a combination of an expert / perfectionistic trait. I was very much a rugged individualist from a very young age. I lost a parent when I was 5 years old. And my older brother went off to university when I was 5. My sister got married when I was 5. And my mother went back to work. So when my dad passed away, I learned very quickly that I couldn't rely upon others. And I had to go within to survive in my new landscape. Now, if you pull back to a 30,000 foot view, certainly my father passed away at a young age from a heart attack, didn't see that coming. My mom had to provide for her child. She had to go to work. My brother got an athletic scholarship for a full ride to school. He should go that. And my sister had already been planning to get married. So nobody did anything wrong. But as a young child, I realized I processed it that I can't rely on other people. The person I can rely on most is myself. Well, I took that forward through all of my life, and it served me well many, many steps along the way. A lot of our behaviors serve us well until they don't. And as I got into entrepreneurship, I just was in the beginning, I was, rocking and rolling. I was making the decisions. The decisions were working. I wasn't taking into account there were a lot more things in my universe beyond my own contribution to it. And so as the market shifted, as the world changed, as the economy was beginning to go into a decline, I wasn't aware of those things because I was very internally focused. So my imposter syndrome got very loud because, I used to do this and now it doesn't work. I used to try that and it doesn't work. And I would just continue to beat myself up internally of not being enough. And I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs, both male and female, but it's certainly a large portion of them are female. And they're not enough comes into, well, I can't be all things to all people. I'm trying to be, like you mentioned earlier, I'm trying to be have a career. I'm trying to raise a family. I'm trying to be a significant other and a spouse. All these things, and there's only so much of me to go around. And for me, it was really, I needed to really hit bottom to break through that imposter syndrome. It's almost like someone with a substance issue. I had to hit bottom to get help because I thought it was my job. I told myself that I'm the CEO. I have to fix all these problems. And when I realized I couldn't, and I finally reached out for help and I got a respected coach to work with me, one of the first things we did was start working on my mindset because I was incredibly internally self-critical. So that was how imposter syndrome impacted me.
Very interesting. I think that, and I've shared on the podcast many times, and you sound like you would probably agree with this. The beginning of a lot of the solutions to our problems are going to begin with our mindset. And I know we heard that when we were younger and we rolled our eyes, your attitude is 99%, and we would roll our eyes or whatever. But it is so very true. I grew up in a great home, but I grew up, in the 60s and 70s and back in, early 80s, and grades mattered. Everything mattered. Those were measuring sticks.
Right.
That were constantly used to measure good and bad and success. And then when all of a sudden, I internalized that if I did everything right, or if I did everything good, that was good. And so I couldn't. I'm like a crazy rule follower. Even if the rule doesn't really need to be followed, I'm going to crazy follow that rule. And I have to tell myself sometimes, Michele, that's just a suggestion. Right. But I hold myself to such a high level of things from, internalization as a child of what was allowed and what wasn't allowed and what was good and what was bad. And to your point, wasn't anything anybody really said to me or forced on me. It was my interpretation of the world around me. Well, and we all have that. We all have something.
We do. What I was going to say is, so many of us entrepreneurs think we're starting a business because we have an idea, or we think we have, nowadays, I have a great app, or I have this thing I can sell, or this product I can provide. The reality is, and the studies will show, most entrepreneurs start their first business to prove something to themselves, or more importantly, to someone else, that they can do something and that they're worthwhile.
Absolutely.
It's the craziest thing. And then when I read that, I'm like, oh my gosh. So I'm going through this conversation with a client of mine, and I'm like, Bob, you're crushing it. Your business is doing better than ever before, yet you just don't sound like you're really happy. And he's like, well, I could be better. I could be this, I could be that. And we kept going. I said, where does that internal soundtrack come from? And he's like, I really just want to prove to my dad I can do this business. I'm like, you know what? I've never done this for a client before. Let's get your dad on a call. Let's talk him through it. And I will testify that you're exceeding your original goals when we started working together. Says to me, I'd love to do that. My dad's been gone for 15 years. Just stop the conversation. Call it. So basically, you're trying to impress a ghost.
Right.
That gives us a whole new area of conversation. Let's work through that. And we spent a lot of time talking through some of the decisions he made. And a lot of it came out, yeah, my dad would like that. This would have been this would have been that. The reality was, I said, I'm sure your dad is very proud of you. We're in a different generation. You're now a different human being than you were when you were 14 or 15. This guy's 56. I'm like, you're crushing it. Your business is more successful than ever before, and you're getting more time to do what you want to do. Maybe how can I help you make peace with the ghosts of your past? But it just blew me away that he was still trying after all these years to impress his parents.
It's interesting when I get people in my coaching environment to go through the why process of Simon Sinek. What is your driver, right? What is this deeply held belief that was formed before you were 18 that's pushing you? And that comes out a lot, that type of, I need to prove to this. So-and-so said I couldn't, and I'm like going to show them.
Right.
There is a lot of that starts showing up. And if we are not aware, one of the biggest things that I think as entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, business owners, if we can cultivate a self-awareness, oh my gosh, game changer. Because now we start to know why we're making the decisions we're making, what's driving it. Is that a healthy decision to make because of what I'm thinking or the way I'm interpreting and processing my environment and the information that I have? And so it makes us aware. I even can catch myself sometimes and go, wait a minute, am I reacting because I feel threatened, or am I reacting because that's what I really want to do?
Sure.
What's happening here?
Sure.
But it's from doing that type of work and then being honest about it. One of the things I know, or a couple of things that you are very passionate about, is about being, and we talked about the words being overused, but being very authentic and transparent and vulnerable in our communication. And I'm certain that in all things, right? But I think,
well, yeah,
did that impact why you knew that you needed to let go those 23 people to then build a new process and a new way of doing things, that new self-awareness that you had?
I wish it was a driver at that point. The self-awareness I had back in 2006 when I made that really difficult decision was a self-awareness that I had responsibility for where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I owed that money to vendors, to lending institutions, and it was my responsibility to try to fix the problem. Because for a long time, I was blaming the employees, I was blaming the economy, I was blaming, not taking any responsibility. But it's so funny you bring up Simon's work. Before he ever wrote his book, I actually had a chance I worked with Simon for 2 years, working on my why. And for me, my why took me 2 years to figure out, but it's really 2 words. I want to improve lives. And once I figured that breakthrough out, and this would have probably been, this is probably about 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago, it shifted how I interacted with everybody. So when I'm in line at Starbucks, how do I improve the lives of the person behind the counter? How do I improve the lives of the people who are in line with me? And everywhere I go, I took it with me. So I was able to live my why, not just in work, but in life in general. Once I did that, my self-awareness became much stronger because I was living in internal authenticity. So now when I'm working with a client or when I go on stage, I often lead with the story of, being so far in debt, my part's in that, having to terminate an entire staff, let 12 people go, how I then had to work on my mindset around what success looks like in order to achieve some financial success, achieve the Inc. list, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, I didn't get where I wanted to go internally until I did enough work to get that self-awareness to literally radiate through every part of my life, from family to personal, to how I interact with people in lines in retail. Everywhere I go, it's not a turn on, turn off thing for me. I have to be, I call it ATV, authentic, transparent, and vulnerable in everything I do in a safe way for me. And what's safe for me may not be as safe for somebody listening today. Well, I would never stand in front of people and tell them I got a company $600,000 in debt. This guy's a complete crazy man. Well, the reality is it's my story. And I actually did that. And what I find is when I do that and I share that story with people and they've got debt problems, they now have a safe person to talk to about that. Because they're probably not $600,000 in debt. And then I tell them how I got out of it and how I renegotiated with the bank and how I made a lot of different shifts in my lifestyle. But now that it's versus me being prescriptive of telling someone what they should do, I'm authentic in sharing from a place of experience on what I experienced and what I did do and some of the negative choices I made and how I had to flip those negative choices around and make them positive going forward to honor my commitments to the lenders, to the vendors, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that our mess can become our message if we allow it to, right?
Oh, I love that. I've not heard that before. I'm totally stealing that right now. I'm telling everybody.
Go right ahead.
Yeah.
And the whole reason that I do everything I do is because I went from building financial software. I mean, come on, I build accounts payable and project accounting systems. I know how these things work. And then I started my small side hustle business and realized that my husband, who was working so that I could have a business, was putting money in so that I could make beautiful things for rich people's homes. I mean, that was insane. And I was like, this is crazy. And I did what you did. I stopped. I evaluated everything. I thought I was a failure. I called and apologized to my father for even sending me to college because I did something so stupid. I mean, he was like, what are you talking about? But that was one of the lowest points for me, right? Because I'd always gotten everything right and I got that so wrong. And I made a decision that day. I'm either going to be in business or I'm not. What does it look like? And I'm going to put processes in place. I'm not going back there again. That's not happening. And so my life's work since then has been to teach people how not to do what I did. Like you're going to I always say, you'll hit your own holes, in the road. But if you could avoid mine, that'd be great. Let me help you. Let me tell you how to avoid mine. But people learn so much when we're open and we're honest and we tell our story. They learn more that way than if we sit and tell them what they ought to do. Nobody wants to hear that.
No, I agree.
It's not good. So now when I talk to people and go, yeah, I did that. Yeah, I did that. Yeah, I didn't have the money to pay those taxes one year because I'd had such a great year and I didn't think about it and I brought the money in and spent it. Yeah, I've done that. So let me tell you how to fix it now because I figured it out. Let me show you what I did. And I love that level of authenticity.
Well, I think it's so important. We live in a very inauthentic world. I mean, again, we live in a world of, going back to the younger folks who can't go out for their evening until they get the perfect angle for their perfect picture to throw it up on social media so the world can see, and they can get all these likes and the world can see how they look like. And we live in a world of spectrums. Either on social media, we share the greatest stuff we do or the worst tragedies of our lives. There's nothing in the middle. 99% of life is lived somewhere in that middle space. And the more authentic we are, the more real we become. I think when we are in the eyes of folks, maybe seen as successful, and we demystify what success really looked like, and to recognize and realize that only 4.3% of businesses ever reach $1 million in revenue in the United States. That's just a fact. So just because your business may be only doing $700,000, for example, but your margins are bringing you an income of $300,000, that makes you quite a success. If your only definition of success is to be $1 million company, recognize that it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. And the flip of that is when people say, well, I don't know if I want to hire people. I just want to do my own gig. Nothing wrong with that. Because if you really try to grow and scale a company, that's a different skill set than just providing the service of, my son's an accountant. He and I had this conversation. He goes, I may just go in and just set up my own accounting program because he wanted to go hike in the mountains in California for 2 years. He had a whole plan. And I said, well, why don't we just get you a Winnebago? You can create the work product on your time, but you're going to be limited in what you can do because of the hours you're willing to work. He goes, I'm fine with that because I want to go do these cool things while I'm young enough, healthy enough to do them. And I'm willing to trade time or trade money for freedom and flexibility. I said, nothing wrong with that. And then I said, well, he goes, what if I want to scale the business? I said, well, you go from being a practitioner, providing the work product, to managing others and managing different parts of the business. And if you really love providing the work product, maybe consider that when you do these other roles, the thing you love doing the most, providing the work product, may not be something you continue to do anymore. And are you okay with that? Doesn't mean there's no right or wrong answer. It's just, what are you willing to do? What is getting you excited to get out of bed every day versus this perception that the only path to being successful is having a multi-million-dollar company with, in 25 states with 10,000 employees. That's one definition of it. But I know some people who are especially creatives and people like that who make a great living working the hours they want to work, providing the services they want to provide, working in selecting customers they want to work for. It's so key to work with people you really enjoy, the people you spend your time with.
I love hearing that definition, Todd, because it's the same one that I have. And I was on a podcast one time and I was kind of flabbergasted when the person was interviewing me, and the comment that she made was, well, we know that you're not even a real business until you hit 100,000 or $1 million in revenue. And my jaw just dropped. And wow. I'm thinking, I know people right now that I'm working with that make $1 million in revenue and they're losing their shirts. Right. But I know people making 350, 400,000 in revenue and they're making a killing. Like, why would that be the indicator? Do you know what I mean? It wasn't $1 million in net profit. It was $1 million in revenue without looking at profitability. Mike Michalowicz makes the comment. He said it on the podcast when he came on. He said, he looks at, and we talk about this on the Profit First side all the time, your revenue is responsibility, but your gross profit, your real revenue is sustainability. And if we're just measuring on, and look, on the interior design side, that total revenue can be inflated because we are cost of goods heavy.
Sure, right? Sure.
So that 1 million could come down to 250 or 300,000 if you take all the product cost out of it.
Exactly.
Well, then tell me that company's really a $300,000 company that has the ability to sell $700,000 in product. I mean, two different things. And so just using that one metric is really not enough. I also love your thought and suggestion that we can, again, I love what you said, a life by design and a business by design. So we can create this work to be what we want to satisfy us. I push my clients as a Profit First coach to profit first your time. And I think that's what your son did. He didn't just say, here's the financial plan, but here's my my plan for my time, right? So what if we said, what's most important? Like if profit is what makes our business sustainable, what makes our lives sustainable?
Right.
And let's put that on our calendar. Let's profit first our time.
Well, because at the end of the day, you can always make more money. Now, there's someone probably right now saying, oh gosh, that guy was $600,000 in debt. Of course, he's going to say that. The reality is we can always make more money. We can come up with different ideas. We can use our resources differently. We can do a lot of different things. But what we can't do is we can't make more time. And it's the only real non-renewable resource we have. So let's use it wisely. And so that if you're going to choose to invest your time in doing something 8-10 hours a day, make it something you're going to enjoy and find a marketplace to do that. And if there's, I've got friends of mine who are passionate musicians, but they just play guitar. They're not really musicians. And we've had those conversations like, well, yeah, I'd love to be, on tour and play in a band and, record records and all that kind of stuff. But their self-awareness comes into play and they recognize like, hey, I love to play music, but it doesn't pay my bills. So I'm going to try and do that as often as possible. So I'm not going to work nights and weekends. But I realized in order to pay my bills, I maybe have to apply this craft or do this service for somebody. And that's okay too. It's almost that starving artist mentality, but without, at our ages to know that there's going to be a real upside to it. But they're very happy people. And instead of, one guy I talked to said, instead of me playing cover songs all the time to get more bigger venues or bigger bar opportunities, I'm going to play my music. And if I don't get paid for it, that's okay. If I get paid a little bit of money, that's okay. But I'm going to play the music I'm passionate about, that I enjoy playing, because you know what? I only have Friday and Saturday nights to do it. And I was so proud of him for having that awareness that he wants to go out and give his gift to the world the way he wants to do it and own that process. And money really became a non-factor for him. And he couldn't be happier once he made that shift.
So important. What did you do? I'm curious now. So you had to lay off your staff. You had to pretty much reinvent, your business and what you were going to do. You became self-aware over time. I mean, and we're talking about these things as if they're static. We know they're not. They're very dynamic. They're happening over time. These are journeys and processes, right? Stretching and movements that we're doing. How did you use all of that and then build something different?
It's so interesting. I had, remember the first employee I hired after I let everybody go. I had a big office, 12 empty desks, and my office was in the back. And this young lady comes in, and it's about 4:00. And she said, oh, hey, where's everybody at? I said, well, why don't you sit down? I said, nobody works here right now but me. And that was the first time I told the story. I said, I made these choices. These are the results of those choices. And now I need to dig myself out of that. I said, we've righted the ship. The company's now profitable again, and I've got plenty of money to pay you, so don't worry about that. I said, but what I really need is I've recognized that I can't do this by myself, and I need to just hire people who have the right mindset. And what I came up with was the first thing in the process was I had to be authentic, transparent, and vulnerable with this person who ended up, she's my longest standing employee. She's been with me ever since. And part of that is being real in the interview, but also recognizing that she didn't have a recruiting background. But she was a really good person, and she had a lot of great skill sets that were transferable. So we came up with a process called Hire for DNA, Not for Resume. And as we were adding people to our staff, we made a conscious choice to go away from the way the market was going at the time, by only hiring people. The market was only hiring people with recruiting backgrounds. And I said, this is ridiculous. I want to hire people who are good people that can work as part of our team, immerse themselves in our culture, and we'll teach them to be great recruiters. And that was a pivotal moment in the growth of the business. So those people came in and they were very coachable because they didn't know better from somewhere else. So the first thing we did, going back to, is we hired people for DNA, not for resume. The second thing is we called it our fail forward mantra. And we would just try different things every day. We'd come up with different contests and come up with different creativity because we're still trying to figure out what the marketplace really needed. And we eventually figured out that the marketplace needed skilled trades machinists and skilled welders and skilled quality people for manufacturing, because there was an increased demand and a diminished supply. Before, we were just doing basically bodies at the door, temporary help. And the more we figured out, and the more we asked the questions of the customers what they could use, the team started really rallying around that. And we had one of our recruiters say, so let me get this straight. I just asked you if you were hiring. You said no. And then the second question is, if you were going to hire somebody, who would you hire? And you need a guy who looks like this. Is that correct? The customer says yes. He was like, so if I get you that guy, Could you make room on your team for me? He goes, absolutely. And this was during the recession. He goes, even in a recession, we need people like that. Oh, so even in a recession, this category is kind of recession proof by and large. Excellent. Okay. Another lesson learned. And finally came up with a way like, okay, if we get you that person, they're not going to be like your temporary help people. So that means we need to get paid weekly or biweekly. When do you pay your people? We pay weekly. Well, so we need to get paid weekly too, because that's what this person's going to get paid. And we need to get paid, so we need to get paid quicker. And of course, because these people are not a dime a dozen, we're going to charge you more for it. Every client said, yeah, we understand that totally. This isn't a commodity purchase. This is a specialized, unique purchase. So over the course of about a 6 to 12 month period, we identified a hidden niche in the marketplace that we could charge more for, get paid faster on. And we really went from taking job orders to recruiting and locating the talent needed to satisfy these orders. And we were representing people almost like a sports agent or a Hollywood agent who never had representation before. We were working for the candidates for free, charging more to the employer, getting paid quicker, which helped us eventually get rid of all the $600,000 in debt and become quite profitable versus doing it the other way that our competitors were doing it. So we really went very deep in one niche that we identified was there, charged more for it, and fixed a lot of our problems.
So funny. During the recession, I increased my prices where everybody was dropping them.
Nice.
And mine was because my husband was between jobs and I had to, I didn't have a choice, right? Somebody's got to bring the money in at this point. And so
right.
He was in between jobs and he has an executive level job. You don't just walk out and get those the next day, certainly not in a recession.
Right.
And so I increased my prices, and what it did was it kicked me into that upper category of person to work with who was not as impacted by the recession, where when my prices were lower, I was working with homeowners and with people that were more impacted by the recession, that were holding on to their funds. But the richer of the rich, they were still spending. And so it was just interesting how understanding and knowing and applying the principles that you learn, I went against the grain. And I think that's what you did as well. And I think that's one of those things that we have to sometimes take those risks. They don't always play out the way we think, but we do have to do the research and then trust it and take some risk in that.
Yeah, and it's not something like you talked about earlier. It's a living, breathing process. We don't just try it once and say, "Oh, it didn't work," and scrap it. Well, so what did we learn? And well, we learned that the marketplace has this need, but we don't have anybody in inventory. So okay, well, let's spend 2 days going out and finding 3 or 4 candidates like the market's telling us, and then let's reverse engineer that marketing piece. And instead of just calling the company on the phone when people still answer the telephone, let's email market these candidates on there, and then let's call behind. Okay, let's try that for a couple of days. And we would just iterate, move forward, try see what worked. And if something didn't work, we scrapped it. If it worked, we kept it. And because I had gone with the DNA versus resume hiring process, I didn't have to have a lot of back and forth with senior people and senior experienced level folks. I had a group of people that were hungry who didn't really know any better,
right?
And ignorance being bliss, and they were willing to try anything. And I just kept championing, and I kept positively reinforcing the days when it didn't go well. Well, you know what? We learned 5 ways it didn't work today. Everybody, I'll see everybody in the morning. Let's come in and let's come up with some new ways. And instead of not communicating like I did it during when I had bad imposter syndrome, I was over communicating. We had daily huddles, not weekly huddles. At one point we were so busy, we had a huddle in the morning and a huddle at night. And we just over communicated. We created a collaborative team environment where people were sharing best practices on the fly. And when I pull back and think about that time frame, we were iterating so rapidly that we didn't have time to feel sorry for ourselves.
Do you think there are any drawbacks, or from your experience, Todd, have you noticed any drawbacks or negative aspect to being authentic or transparent or vulnerable? I know you mentioned a minute ago that, you share and other people might not share that. That was one of the things I was thinking about. Where's that line? And is there a line?
I think there's always a line based upon knowing your audience to a certain level. And I watched a lot of stuff from Brené Brown and how she talks about vulnerability. I think her work is truly outstanding. And one of the favorite things she says is, and I love the interview, she's like, yeah, I was a researcher on vulnerability, but I'm not going to be vulnerable. That was her old mindset. And
Right.
I laughs in the audience lashes. Now I'm vulnerable every darn day of my life because I'm now the vulnerability gal. It just kind of creates a whole thing. So when I go and talk to an audience or when I'm talking to a group of entrepreneurs, what I feel is my responsibility by being the keynote speaker is to lead with that vulnerable step forward first and trust the process. Trust that people will embrace it. I'm sure there have been times when I've shared the hiccup story of my businesses and the choices I made where there's a lot of judging going on and there is a lot of talk. But because I put it out there first and because it is my story, nobody can give me any feedback on what I did or nobody can be a worse or harsher critic of me than I was back in those days. I guarantee you, hands down, I am the leader in the clubhouse, to use a golf analogy, on kicking my own butt. Nobody does it better than I do. So I kind of recognize all that. And the blessings I've received by standing up and leaning into those uncomfortable in the moments first opens the door for people to share things that they've never maybe shared before in their lives. I literally had one client in a meeting with his leadership team start to cry because he shared something with his team about why he was in the why question, the cynic work, why he was in business that his staff had never heard. And they'd worked for, a lot of them had worked for him for 10 plus years. And afterwards, when we did our debrief, I said, what caused you to get to that point? He's like, you were so real. You were so authentic. You were so open to all of us from the very beginning. He goes, you created that safe space for me to do that. And now, I feel like my staff sees me more as just a dictator, but see me as a real human being, strengths and weaknesses, positives and limitations. And now I think I can now finally take off one of those masks and interact with them differently. So for me, the absolute joy of the work that I do, whether it's working one-on-one with a leader, with a leadership team, or even from stage, is those aha light bulb moments. And those light bulb moments often come from hearing some of my worst stories. They're like, aha, I don't want to be that guy, which is fine. Or, oh, aha, okay, I can learn from him. I bet I can learn more from him. Let me ask a couple of questions. Or I had one person come up to me and say, because listen, you talked about how bad your situation was. Let me tell you how, it was almost like a competition. Let me tell you how bad my situation is and maybe you can give me some help with this. I said, were you planning on talking about that ahead of time? He goes like, no, my wife dragged me. I didn't even want to talk about this stuff. Thank you so much for being real. He called it being real. But it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
I remember when one of my sons was younger, and I remember turning around, then we were in the car, and I said, I am so sorry that I did that, whatever it was I did. And he said, what did you say? I said, I'm telling you that I'm really sorry. I messed up. And I don't know why I did. I can't even remember what it was I did. And he said, are you serious right now? And I'm thinking, come on, buddy. I said, yes, I'm serious right now. And he said, Mom, I thought you always got it right.
Right.
And I was like, what? He's like, I just thought as a parent that you always got it right. I didn't know that you were going to get it wrong. And I said, I've been apologizing to you the whole time. I've always told my kids I was sorry if I did something. I never just covered it over and acted like it didn't happen. But he was shocked at my vulnerability as a parent to say, I don't know what we should do, or I tried that and it didn't work, or there's not a primer that's telling me what my next step should be here. Mm-hmm. And I'm figuring out this parenting and adulting thing while you're figuring out this kid thing. Right?
Yeah, I'll say amen to that. Isn't that the truth?
And even now, parenting adults, I am figuring out the new norm of what does it mean to be an adult with adults. And that's a whole different thing. I'm still figuring it out while they're still figuring out what is it like to be where they are. And just even opening that conversation with him, I still remember to this day, him like in shock that I would apologize as a parent and take off that mask of I've got it together. And, our kids want to know that we kind of have it together. Right?
And they don't expect us to be perfect, though.
But they don't expect it. And then when you turn around and go, hey, look, I'm figuring it out too. I don't know where he thought I got it all poured into my brain at some point, but it was a good moment for me to realize that vulnerability and that openness and that honesty in that moment was enough. I will say in the sales process, sometimes we need to be careful. You certainly don't want to walk in and drop, hey, I just lost $600,000, won't you?
Oh gosh, no. So yeah,
Right.
so when
there's a time and a place for it, is my
right. When I fired everybody, I told no one. I didn't tell my clients. The clients would call in, hey, can I talk to Bob? Oh, he's at a client appointment. How can I help you? Oh yeah, I lied through my teeth, flat out. I was not transparent because I could not afford to lose the business. I think it's a matter of, where are you in your growth? Where are you and where can you share? And the reality is, if someone's listening, for example, and they say, wow, my business is really struggling. I don't have anybody to talk to. Maybe I'll talk to my kids about it. I would tell them not to do that.
Right.
Reach out to a trusted advisor, reach out to a friend, reach out to a peer group. Heck, go to my website, call me. There are certain things we want to have someone to go to, but I would never argue that we should need to be the same level of authenticity and transparency with everybody all the time. I think there's got to be trusted people in your life. Again, I think so often the job of a parent is to provide safety and security for their children, and to tell them that you're in bad financial straits is really tough. No different than, I had a client call me up. Hey, I'm not sure I'm going to make payroll this week, and I think I'm going to go in and tell my employees. This is like on Tuesday. I said, hold on, wait a minute. Let's strategize. There's probably a way to work through this. The last thing you want to do is walk in and tell everybody you're going to miss payroll on Tuesday when payroll is not going to be cut until Friday. Just hold off. Wait a minute. Well, you said it should be real and authentic. I said, there's always a caveat. Yeah, be real with me as your coach. Let's work this out. But don't walk in and tell everybody. You're going to have a mass exodus. You're going to freak people out. Sure enough, we were able to solve the problem. He was able to pay everybody, and the employees were never any of the wiser. It's, again, sometimes pick who you need to be authentic with, but don't treat it as you should walk around telling everybody all your dark and dirty secrets in a way that you aren't comfortable with the feedback you're going to get, as well as making them potentially uncomfortable.
Exactly. It's about finding this. It's about building a trust, right? So we want to be honest in all of our dealings and all of our transactions, but it doesn't mean you got to tell everything the minute you meet them. Think about it kind of like going on a first date.
Right.
If you go on a first date and you're going to tell everybody every bad relationship you've ever had, they're probably going to walk out.
And if they don't walk out, then they're probably a little bit more crazy than you really need. Exactly.
You're thinking, I don't want all that. But I am with you. I have my own coach. I am a coach and I have a coach because I need that safe space to unload and to share and to be vulnerable in a way that I'm understood, right? Without the judgment. That's the same thing that I provide, that you provide for those that work with us, is a safe place to share. Because I do work in the numbers and I work in that, I do a lot of, I've just recently been working with a client so that we could get IRS debt on payment plans. I've got people that are, having to make some really big life choices similar to what you've had to do for their business and their homes to be able to move forward and to regroup. And these are very, very difficult decisions and weighty, heavy life positions that they're in. We're not talking just the lighthearted, should I hire, should I not, right? These are heavy things. And having that safe place to talk to. I had a client tell me the other day, she made a comment. She's like, this has been so bad and you're the only one I can tell.
Right.
I can't even yet tell my family or, others that are involved. And that I understand that. I hold that dearly. That means a lot to me. And I want to respect that. But I also need that for my life. We all need that.
I think the best thing a coach can do is have a coach. Like you said, you have a coach. I have a coach. And someone said to me one time, like, well, I'm looking at hiring you and I'm looking at a couple of other coaches. Why should I hire you? I said, well, ultimately hiring a coach is often very much a practical decision made with a gut feel. But I will share that I drink the Kool-Aid. So I'm not going to be just telling you that I'm a lifelong learner. I'm not going to be prescriptive in the work we do. I still use a coach. Here's why I use a coach. Here's the value they provide to me, because I don't have all the answers. And sometimes I need to go to somebody because the imposter syndrome will still come back. The imposter syndrome used to drive the car. Now it sits in the passenger seat, but it's still a backseat driver sometimes trying to control things. We all need those things. And the person who ended up being a client was so appreciative of the fact that people like you and I still use coaches. We're not just talking from on top down to them. We are essentially walking that journey with them as their coach, but we still get coached versus, some coaches, well, I've seen these people will walk out and act as if they have all the answers to all businesses' problems and just plug into my system for $29.99 a month and you will be fixed too. It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't. And I'm so thankful, Todd, that you have shared today your journey, that you have talked to us about being authentic and transparent and vulnerable and how we can use that. And I got to tell you, you're the first guy that has really been willing to talk to me about, not that I run around and ask about it all the time, but imposter syndrome. Again, we hear about it, the lean in, we hear about it so much from the female perspective. And I remember even having it in software, just thinking, I don't know everything. And at some point, somebody's going to realize I don't know something. Instead of going, you know what? Nobody knows everything. To your point a minute ago, we all are learning. We are all growing. And so the better answer is, I don't know it, but I can figure it out. Or I can find resources to help us figure it out, right?
I don't know the answer, but let me work on it and I'll get back to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And just that honesty and transparency is worth so much.
Well, so I think it's so valuable, the conversation today, because I really want, hopefully people will leave this conversation recognizing that they're not alone. So the biggest challenge I had when I suffered deeply from the imposter syndrome was this sense and feeling of being alone. And that I'm the only one who has these thoughts. I'm the only one who has these challenges. I'm the only one who's made these choices, et cetera, et cetera. And so I thank you so much for the opportunity to demystify this entrepreneur syndrome for anybody who's listening.
Oh, yes. Exclamation, exclamation, exclamation. That idea of isolation, nobody understands. I'm all by myself. I'm in a room of people and I'm alone. That is a very real struggle that we can have as entrepreneurs, right? Because we do feel, even to your point a minute ago about be careful who you share what with, some people are on a need to know basis, right? Especially your staff down. If you went in and told them everything that went through your head every single day, it would scare them.
Oh, it's heavy as the head that wears the crown. I mean, you chose to be an entrepreneur. You chose to, in my case, to lead a company. It's a choice I made. And when I think back, what I would have told them differently, what I would have done differently is not tell them how bad things were. What I would have done, one, is not let things get as bad as they got. Two, the struggles and challenges we were having, I would have at least opened the door and shared some of them and then asked them to help me get out of it versus just telling them what to do and then giving them goals and KPIs to measure and follow. And when they didn't hit them, instead of me, I was so conflict averse at that time in my life. I just let them twist in the wind and not follow through and not do what they're supposed to do and not hit their sales quotas, things like that, versus wait a minute, Bob, you're not hitting your numbers. What's going on? And approach it, lean into that uncomfortable conversation, approach it with curiosity to learn more. And I may learn that Bob's got to go today versus, 6 months later when I finally let him go, or realize, wow, we have a real challenge with our process. Let's attack that process. But I just stuck my head in the sand and avoided everything. So I would have done a lot of things differently with the experience I have now versus the mindset I had then.
And I'm so thankful to have podcasts and to have books and to have blogs and articles and resources that are so readily available for us to share these ideas, and that we all can struggle with them. And that, it's not something that only women struggle with or only men struggle with. We're all struggling with these things. And so having the conversation and kind of linking arms in it, right? And going, we are not by ourselves. So how did you solve that? What did you do? I'm also part of a mastermind on top of my own coach, because it is so important to learn from other peers what's working and what's not working. So the same things that I offer, I take a part in from my own business because they're so valuable in that sharing of information.
Agreed.
So Todd, where can everybody find you?
So best place to catch up with me, anybody who's interested in connecting more, is I'm certainly on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm on all the social media platforms. But really the best source to go to my website, extraordinaryadvisors.com. And anybody who goes there and mentions that they heard me on Michele's podcast today, I'm happy to give you a half hour of my time for free. We've talked a lot about imposter syndrome. Someone may be feeling a little vulnerable and unpacked and want to reach out to somebody. I'd like to offer my services to them just for quick half-hour conversation so that they don't feel like they're alone. Or if you want to talk about business strategy, or you want to hear more of the deep down and dirty about how I really dug out of the debt problem, I'm happy to have those conversations with you as well. Because really it's an opportunity for me to give to people who are listening in the audience today and honor all the coaches and mentors I've had before me. So this is a great opportunity for me to give back. So if someone wants to connect with me, please reach out.
That's awesome. And I'll make sure that all of that is in the show notes as well, Todd, so that they will know how to, if they're driving right now and listening, they'll be able to go to the show notes and be able to get into contact with you. And you also have a book. Tell us about your book.
Yeah, thank you. I wrote a book, back 5 or 6 years ago. It's for kids getting out of high school or college and looking for their first job. It's called The Job Search Process. It's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And it's specifically geared to help someone get their first job in 6 weeks or less. In 2019, 2020, they should be able to get their job in 2 weeks or less. It's such a great, robust economy. But it takes them through the processes of laying out a job search, acting as if they are their own recruiter in order to get themselves 3 to 5 interviews. And from those 3 to 5 interviews, 1 to 3 job offers so they can start their career off on the right foot.
Wow, that's amazing. Both of my kids have jobs, but that is awesome. I may have to think about that. It sounds like a great gift from graduating from college.
Well, and it came really from a point of me being very frustrated with the university situation. I was on the board of a university and I had a conversation with the dean of the business school. And it really came down to, like, what are we doing as a school to prepare these kids to go into the workforce? Because as an employer, I was interviewing these kids and they weren't prepared.
Right.
And it really came down to a divide. And the divide was the school thought they were in the education business. As a parent who had a college student at the time, I thought they were in the job readiness business. And they said, no, we're in the education business. It's really more incumbent upon the student to find their first opportunity. I said, well, that doesn't work for me. I'm going to teach these kids how to do it myself. So really more of I saw a problem, how do I help attack it to be of greater service? Going back to the cynic piece of how do I improve lives? That's really where the book came from.
Wow, that's an awesome idea. Like I said, all my kids are in their 20s. And so, of course, all of their friends are either graduating or just graduated. And it is a very different landscape to get a job now than it was 20, 30 years ago when I was out looking. So we had a whole career centers that went through all of that with us, that taught us how to dress and what to do and how to speak and what to put together. And I don't see it working quite the same way now as it used to.
It does not.
Wow. Well, I'll make sure that we put a link to that in the show notes as well, Todd, so anybody who's interested can find it. And thank you so much again for being with us today and sharing a bit of your journey.
Michele, it was a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks so much to Todd for sharing his experiences, insights, failures, and successes. Don't you just love the deep conversations about these topics? Almost like an uncovering of an idea that holds us captive because we think we're the only ones suffering when clearly we're not. Hopefully you now have a way to take your mess and craft a message. Profitability is about so much more than money, and my goal is to help us build a life and a business that is profitable, and that's exactly what you can find in the Designer's Inner Circle. More information is available out at scarletthreadconsulting.com, but my goal is to help you do all this by choice because profit doesn't happen by accident.